Welcome back to Into the Pit. Apparently, we just hit 400 subscribers, which is awesome. Don't know when that happened. Apparently, I was at school while it happened, and I didn't exactly have time to come up with a subscriber special video thing. I seem to be doing those for like every single milestone we hit. So it doesn't seem like I'm going to be able to do that for 400. Didn't have time, haven't even started. I'm doing this instead, because you guys probably like it more anyway. But I do have something planned for this whole thing. So, in the meantime, this is going to be the final story in Into the Pit, called Count the Ways. And, you know, as always, part 1. Part 2 will be later. I don't know. Give me 2 days, probably. And, yeah, after that, I'll be reading the second book right away. Since I already have it, you know, it makes no sense to delay. I'll be doing it right away. It gets even more messed up than that last story. So, this is where things start to get serious, trust me. A lot of you guys were already, like, shocked at what happened at the end of that last story. I won't spoil it in case there's someone here who somehow hasn't seen it yet. If not, listen to that right now, because it's crazy, and don't read the comments, because people are spoiling it in the comments. But yeah. I'm going to do this one right after I finish Into the Pit, and that's all I have to say. Yeah, so if you want to know when the next chapters come out, subscribe. Not only does it help me and the channel, it helps you. Probably more than it helps me. But yeah. I mentioned last time that there's a familiar character in this story. I'll do my best to voice him, but it's not exactly gonna be great, but I want to try, so. Why, if it isn't Millie Fitzim? No, that's awful. Wow, okay, that was terrible. Nope, I'm just gonna read it normally, because that's not happening. Why, if it isn't Millie Fitzsimmons, a deep, booming voice said. In the darkness, it was hard to tell exactly where it was coming from, but it felt like it was all around her. Silly Millie, chilly Millie, the ice-cold goth girl who's always dreaming of death. Am I right? Who are you? Millie demanded. Where are you? Above her, a large pair of terrifying blue eyes rolled backward, looking down into the chamber. I'm right here, silly Millie. Or maybe I should say, you're right here. You're right inside my belly. In the belly of the beast, you could say. So, you're the bear? Millie wondered if she had fallen asleep after she climbed inside the old robot. If she was dreaming. This was all too weird. You can think of me as a friend. Your friend till the end. We just have to decide if the end is going to be slow or quick. I don't understand. The space was starting to feel claustrophobic. She tried the door. It wouldn't budge. You'll understand very soon, chilly Millie. You goth girls always crack me up, all dressed like professional mourners, so serious all the time, daydreaming about death like he's the lead singer of some boy band, and that when you meet him it'll be love at first sight. Well, Merry Christmas, Millie. I'm gonna make all your dreams come true. It's not a question of if, but how. What was happening? She was definitely awake. Had she lost her mind, descended into madness like a character in an Edgar Allan Poe story? I'd like to get out now, she said. Her voice sounded small and shaky. Nonsense, the voice said. You're going to stay in here all nice and cozy while we work out how you're going to have your dream date with death. The choice is all yours, but it'll be my pleasure to present you with some options. Options of how to die? Millie felt the cold, metallic taste of fear in the back of her throat. Fantasies about death were one thing, but this felt like reality. Millie. What a stupid name. She was named after her great-grandmother Millicent Fitzsimmons. But Millie wasn't the kind of name you saddled a person with. A cat or a dog, maybe, but not an actual human. Millie's black cat was named Annabel Lee, after the beautiful dead girl in the Edgar Allan Poe poem, which meant that Millie's cat officially had a better name than she did. But, Millie thought, it made sense that her parents would come up with such a ridiculous name. She loved them, but they were ridiculous people in a lot of ways. Flighty and impractical. The kind of people who would never think how hard elementary school would be for a little girl whose name rhymed with silly. Her parents flitted from job to job, from hobby to hobby, and now, it seemed, from country to country. Over the summer, Millie's dad had been offered a one-year teaching job in Saudi Arabia. Her mom and dad had given her a choice. She could go with them. It'll be an adventure, her mom kept saying, and be homeschooled. Or she could move in with her kooky grandpa for a year and start at the local high school. Talk about a lose-lose situation. After lots of crying and raging and sulking, Millie had finally chosen the kooky grandpa option, over being stranded in a foreign country with her well-meaning but unreliable parents. And so now Millie was here in a strange little room in Grandpa's big, strange Victorian house. She had to admit the idea of living in an old, sprawling 150-year-old house where someone surely had to have died at some point suited her well enough. The only problem was that it was filled to the brim with her grandparents' junk. Millie's grandpa was a collector. Lots of people have collections, of course, comic books or gaming cards or action figures, but Grandpa didn't collect a specific type of thing so much as accumulate a lot of different things. He was definitely a collector, but a collector of what? Millie wasn't sure. It all seemed very random. Looking around the living room, she could see old license plates and hubcaps hanging on one wall, old baseball bats and tennis rackets on another. A life-size suit of armor stood guard at one side of the front door, and a mangy-looking taxidermy bobcat stood at the other side, its mouth open and fangs bared in a menacing fashion. One glass case in the living room contained nothing but old porcelain baby dolls with tiny teeth and staring glass eyes. They were creepy, and Millie tried to stay away from them, though they still showed up sometimes in her nightmares, with those little teeth chomping at her. Her new bedroom had been Grandma's sewing room, and it still contained the old sewing machine, even though her grandma had died before Millie was born. Grandpa had moved in a narrow bed and dresser to accommodate Millie and her belongings, and she had tried to make the room her own. She draped the bedside lamp with a sheer black lacy scarf so it gave off a muted glow. She covered the dresser with dripping candles, and she hung posters of Kurt Harrison, her favorite singer, on the walls. In one poster, the cover design for his album Rigor Mortis, Kurt's lips were peeled back to reveal a set of metal fangs. A perfect red bead of blood glistened on his chin. The trouble was, though, that no matter how much Millie tried to match the room's decor to her personality, it never quite worked. The sewing machine was still there, and the wallpaper was cream-colored and decorated with tiny pink rosebuds. Even with Kurt Harrison's face glowing on the wall, there was something about the room that seemed sweet and old ladyish. "Soup's on," Grandpa called from the bottom of the stairs. This was how he always announced dinner, and yet he had never once served soup. "I'll be there in a minute," Millie yelled back. Not really caring whether she ate dinner or not, she dragged herself off the bed and made her way downstairs, trying not to bump into or trip over any of the clutter that seemed to fill every square inch of the house. Millie met Grandpa in the dining room, where the walls were decorated with souvenir plates printed with the names and landmarks of different states he had visited with Grandma when she was alive. The opposite wall displayed replicas of replicas of antique swords. Millie wasn't sure what those were about. Grandpa was every bit as weird as his collections. His wispy gray hair was always messy and wild, and he always wore the same ratty tan cardigan. He looked like he could play a wacky inventor in an old movie. "Dinner is served, madam," Grandpa said, setting a bowl of mashed potatoes on the side. Millie sat at her place at the table and surveyed the visually disgusting meal. Mushy-looking meatloaf, instant mashed potatoes, and creamed spinach that she knew had been packaged and frozen in a solid block until he zapped it in the microwave. It was a meal you could eat even if you didn't have teeth, which, Millie supposed, went with the territory of having an old person cook for you. Millie loaded her plate with mashed potatoes, since they were the only edible thing on the table. "Now make sure you get some meatloaf and spinach too," Grandpa said, passing her the bowl of greens. "You need the iron. You always look so pale." "I like being pale." Millie wore a sheer light powder to make her face look even paler in contrast to the black eyeliner and black clothing she favored. "Well," Grandpa said, helping himself to meatloaf, "I'm glad you don't bake yourself in the sun like your mother did when she was your age. Still, you could use a little color in your cheeks." He held out the platter of meatloaf to her. "You know I don't eat meat, Grandpa." Meat was gross, and also murder. "Eat some spinach, then," Grandpa said, spooning some onto her plate. Plenty of iron in it. You know, back when I learned to do a little bit of cooking I can manage, it was all about meat. Meatloaf, steaks, roast beef, pork chops. But if you'll help me find some vegetarian recipes, I'll sure try to cook them. It would probably be better for my health to eat less meat anyway. Millie sighed and pushed the spinach around on her plate. Don't bother. It doesn't really matter whether I eat or not. Grandpa set down his fork. Of course it matters. Everybody's got to eat. He shook his head. There's no pleasing you, is there, girlie? I'm trying to be nice and figure out what you like. I want you to be happy here. Millie pushed her plate away. It's a waste of energy to try and make me happy. I'm not a happy person. And you know what? I'm glad I'm not happy. Happy people are just lying to themselves. Well, if there's nothing in store for you but misery, I guess you might as well get started on your homework, Grandpa said, and ate his last bite of mashed potatoes. Millie rolled her eyes and flounced out of the room. Homework was a misery. School was a misery. Her whole life was a misery. In her miserable room, Millie opened her laptop and searched for famous poems about death. She reread her old favorites. Annabel Lee, the cat with the same name, was curled up on the bed, and The Raven by Poe. Then tried one she'd never seen by Emily Dickinson. The poem talked about death, as a guy picking up a girl for a date. A date with death. She thought of death as a handsome black-cloaked stranger, choosing her as the one he would take away from the boredom and misery of everyday life. She imagined he looked just like Kurt Carrion. Inspired, she grabbed her black leather journal and began to write. She knew poems didn't have to rhyme, but Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Dickinson rhymed, so she tried to rhyme her poem too. In the end, she decided it wasn't bad. Sighing with dread of what lay before her, she closed her journal and took out her homework. Algebra. What use was algebra in the face of human beings' inevitable mortality? None. Well, none except that if she didn't pass all her classes, her parents would cut off the allowance that her grandpa doled out to her every week. And she was saving up for more jet morning jewelry. She opened up her algebra book, picked up her pencil, and began. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. What? Millie snapped, and slammed her book shut, as if she'd been interrupted doing something she actually enjoyed. Grandpa nudged the door open with his foot. He was carrying a glass of milk and a plate of cookies. I thought you might need a little study fuel, he said. I know chocolate always did the trick for me. Grandpa, I'm not a kid anymore, Millie said. You can't buy my happiness with a few cookies. Okay, Grandpa said, still holding the plate. Do you want me to take them away, then? No, Millie said quickly. Leave them here. Grandpa shook his head, smiled a little, and set the plate and the glass on Millie's bedside table. I'm going to go putter around my workshop for an hour or so, girlie, he said. Call me if you need anything. I won't need anything, Millie said, turning back to her algebra homework. She waited until she was sure he was gone and then devoured the cookies. Options of how to die, exactly, the voice in the darkness said. You're catching on now, bright girl that you are. Now, I'd call the first couple of options the lazy choices. They don't require me to do anything but keep you here and let nature take its course. The advantage to these is that they're easy peasy for me, but not so easy for you. Slow with lots of suffering, but who knows? That might appeal to your morbid sensibilities. Lots of opportunities for languishing. You like languishing. What do you mean? Millie asked. Whatever the answer was, she knew she wasn't going to like it. Dehydration is one option, the voice said. No water at all, and you could start dying in as few as 3 days or as many as 7. You're young and healthy, so I'd put my money on it taking you a while. Depriving the body of water has fascinating effects. With no fluids coming in to filter and flush, the kidneys shut down and your body starts poisoning itself, making you sicker and sicker. Once these poisons have started to build up, you can suffer total organ failure or a heart attack or stroke. But that's death for you. So glamorous, so romantic. Are you making fun of me? The voice that came out of Millie was tiny and soft, the voice of a scared little girl. Not at all, my dear. I like you, Millie, and that's why I'm here to make your wishes come true. Like a genie, except you're the one who's trapped in a bottle. The voice stopped to chuckle. Starvation is another classic too, but that's really a slow-moving train. It can take weeks for the body to use up its stores of nutrition and break down all its proteins and turn on itself. It can take weeks. Some people have even lasted a couple months. Millie knew her grandpa would rescue her before she could starve to death. That'll never work. Grandpa comes in here to putter around after dinner every night. He'll find me." "How?" the voice asked. "He'll hear me in here. I'll scream." "Scream all you want, Lamb Chop. It's soundproof. No one will hear you. And anyway, after a few days, you'll be too weak to scream." Winter break was just 1 week away, and the whole school was decorated with wreaths, Christmas trees, and the occasional menorah. Millie didn't know why people got so excited over holidays. They were just a desperate attempt to invent some happiness in the face of life's utter meaninglessness. Well, they couldn't fool her. People could wish her Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays until they turned Santa Claus red in the face, but she wouldn't say it back. Not that people were going out of their way to wish Millie well. As she walked down the hall to the lunchroom, one blonde cheerleader, Millie didn't even know her name, said, "I'm surprised to see you out in the daylight, Dracula's daughter." That was her nickname, Dracula's daughter. Of course, everybody knew she was really Jeff and Audrey Fitzsimmons' daughter, which made her almost as much of a misfit as she would have been if Dracula really were her dad. The Fitzsimmonses were kind of a joke in the town, famous for their tendency to start projects with great enthusiasm and then abandon them. They had bought a run-down but once beautiful colonial house when Millie was 10 and had thrown themselves into refurbishing it. They had kept it up for about 3 months until they ran out of time, money, and energy. As a result, the house had a weird patchwork quality. The living room and the kitchen were repainted and had new fixtures, but the bedroom still had old peeling wallpaper and floors with squeaky boards. The bathroom pipes screamed when you turned on the water, and the ancient tub, sink, and toilet never looked clean no matter how much they were scrubbed. The most talked about thing, though, was the exterior of the house. Millie's dad had repainted the front and one side a nice soft blue with cream trim, but paint was expensive, painting was exhausting, and he really didn't like getting up on ladders. As a result, the front of the house was painted beautifully, but the back and other side were still covered with old, flaking white paint. Millie's mom said nobody would notice. It was like when people arranged the Christmas tree so the ugly side faced the wall. People noticed. People also noticed the Fitzsimmons' inability to keep a steady job. Millie's parents were always coming up with some new scheme that was finally going to bring them the success of their dreams. One year, her mom was making candles and selling them at the farmer's market, while her dad started a nutritional supplement store that closed its doors after 6 months. After that, her mom and dad started a store that sold yarn and knitting supplies, and they might have made a go of it if either of her parents had known more about yarn and knitting, and then they bought a food truck, even though they were both terrible cooks. Millie couldn't understand how her parents could remain so optimistic with each failure, but they did. They attacked each new project with enthusiasm, and then after a few months, both the project and the enthusiasm fizzled out. They weren't poor, exactly. There was always food to eat, even if toward the end of the month it tended to dwindle to pancake mix and boxed macaroni and cheese. But there was always worry about how the bills would get paid. Millie knew that her grandpa helped them out some months. Her grandpa was also considered weird in town, but was cut some slack because he was old and a widower, and I think I just read the same sentence twice, and had been an excellent high school math teacher for many years. As a result, he earned the title of eccentric instead of weird. Some people said that maybe by taking this teaching job in Saudi Arabia, Jeff was finally putting it together and following in his dad's footsteps. Millie knew, though, that her dad would fritter away at this opportunity like he had so many others. In the cafeteria, Millie took a second to adjust to the deafening din of hundreds of teenagers talking and laughing. She walked past a table full of popular girls and saw her best friend from elementary school, Hannah, sitting with them, laughing at something all the other girls were laughing about. Millie and Hannah had been inseparable from kindergarten through 5th grade, playing on the swings or jumping rope together at every recess, and playing dolls or board games at each other's houses after school. But in middle school, popularity started to be more and more important to Hannah, and she drifted away from Millie and toward the crowd who was always giggling. What Millie understood, but Hannah did not, was that those girls never accepted Hannah as more than a hanger-on. Hannah lived in a plain little house in a plain little neighborhood, and didn't have the money or social status to make the cut. The popular girls didn't push her away, but they never let her into their inner circle either. It made Millie feel sad that Hannah preferred to accept crumbs from the popular girls, rather than real friendship from her. But, then again, a lot of things made Millie sad. Millie sat alone, nibbling on the egg salad sandwich and apple slices her grandpa had packed for her, and reading tales of mystery and imagination. She was managing to drown out all the cafeteria noise and focus on the story she was reading, The Fall of the House of Usher. Roderick Usher, the main character in the story, couldn't bear noise of any kind. But then she felt herself being watched. She looked up from her work to see a lanky boy with horn-rimmed glasses and frizzy hair. Both his ears were studded with silver earrings. "Hi, I was wondering," he nodded at the chair across from Millie. "Is anybody sitting there?" Was this guy asking to sit with her? Nobody ever asked to sit with her. "My imaginary friend," Millie said. Wait, was that a joke? She never joked with people. The boy grinned. Millie looked at the empty chair for a second. "But she says you can suit yourself and sit here." "Okay," he said, setting his tray down. "Thanks, to both of you. I don't really know anybody yet. I'm new." "Nice to meet you, new. I'm Millie." What, was she a dad now, making all these dad jokes? "My name is Dylan, actually. I just moved here from Toledo." He gestured toward her book. "A Poe fan, huh?" Millie nodded. "Me too," Dylan said, "and H.P. Lovecraft. I love all the old scary writers." "I've never read Lovecraft," Millie said. Better to be honest than to try and fake knowledge and talk herself into a corner. "I've heard of him, though." "Oh, you love him," Dylan said. "Super dark and twisty." He looked around the cafeteria. "So, is this school as lame as it seems?" "Lamer," Millie said, marking her place in her book and shutting it. The House of Usher wasn't going anywhere, and she couldn't remember the last time she had an interesting conversation. "Well, I'll tell you what," Dylan said, gesturing with his French fry. "So far, you're the only person I've met here who seems cool." Millie felt her face heating up. "Thanks," she said. I like your jacket." The bell rang, signaling that the lunch period was about to end. Dylan leaned toward Millie and half whispered, "Do not ask for whom the bell tolls." "It tolls for thee," Millie finished. Where did this guy come from? Toledo, sure, but how is he so sophisticated and knowledgeable? She had never met anyone like him. Dylan stood up. "Millie, it's been a rare pleasure. Would you and your imaginary friend mind if I joined you two at lunch tomorrow?" "We wouldn't mind at all," she said. "See, I had thought about freezing you to death, too," the voice said. "I thought I could short out the power in here so the space heater turns off, and my metal body can get pretty cold. But I figured your grandpa would come in here and notice the power was out in his precious workshop, and would fix it right away, so freezing to death is a no-go. Sorry if you had your heart set on that one, sweet pea." Millie was shivering, not from the cold, but from fear. "I don't understand. Why do you want to kill me?" "Interesting you should ask," the voice said. "There are a couple of reasons, actually. The first is quite simply that it's something to do. I sat in a salvage yard for ages, before your grandpa found me and brought me here, where I've just been sitting too. I'm bored out of my skull. Not that I have a literal skull, but you know what I mean." "Aren't there other things you could do besides killing people?" Millie asked. Whatever this being was, it was obviously intelligent. Maybe she could reason with it. "None so interesting, and plus there's my second reason, which is that death is what you want. You've been mooning around since you moved here, talking about how you want to die. Well, I like to kill people, and you want to die. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. Like, those little birds that pick the parasites off rhinoceroses. The bird gets to eat, and the rhinoceros gets rid of the itchy little bugs. We both get what we want. Win-win." Millie suddenly realized that she had spoken of death, written about it, but it had always just been an interesting idea to play around with. She never intended to take any action to make it a reality. "But I don't want to die. Not really." A horrible rumbling sound surrounded Millie, and shook the body of the machine that trapped her. It took her a few seconds to realize the sound was laughter. For dinner, Grandpa made spaghetti with marinara sauce, garlic bread, and Caesar salad. It was much better than the meals he had usually slung together. "You're actually eating tonight," Grandpa said. "Because this is actually good," Millie said, twirling spaghetti on her fork. "All right, I finally found something you like to eat," Grandpa said. "I'll add it to my limited that's a French word. What does that repertoire? I kept the sauce meatless for you and added meatballs to mine, so everybody's happy. Herbivores and carnivores alike." "Well, happy may be stretching it," Millie said, unwilling to admit that she actually had kind of a good day. "But the spaghetti is good, and my day at school didn't totally stink." "And what made the day better than usual?" Grandpa asked, spearing a meatball. I met someone who seems kinda cool. Really? A girl someone or a boy someone? Millie didn't like Grandpa's insinuating tone. Well, not that it matters, but it happens to be a boy. Don't try to turn it into some kind of love story or something, though. We just had a decent conversation, that's all. A decent conversation is something, especially these days. Most people your age won't look up from their phones long enough to say as much as how do you do, Grandpa said. Not to put the cart before the horse, but I met your grandma when I was just a little older than you are now. So what? Now you have me engaged to this guy I just met? Grandpa, I'm 14. Grandpa laughed. You're right that you're much too young to be engaged, and your grandma and I didn't get engaged when we were teenagers either. But we were high school sweethearts, and then we went to the same college, and married in June right after we graduated. He smiled. And it all started with a good conversation at lunch, like you had today, so you never know. Slow down, old man, Millie said, fighting a smile. Grandpa's eyes went soft and misty. I'm just reminiscing. I wish you could have known your grandma, Millie. She was really something special. And to lose her when she wasn't even 40. It's like Annabel Lee, Millie said. The Poe poem? Grandpa asked. It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea. Yeah, I guess it was something like that. You know Poe? Millie asked. It was weird to hear him recite one of her favorite poems. Grandpa was a math person. She didn't expect him to know anything about poetry. Believe it or not, I'm a pretty literate old dude. I like Poe and a lot of other writers, too. And I know you like Poe because he's dark and spooky, and it's easy to romanticize death when you're young and it's so far away. But Poe didn't write about death because he thought it was romantic. He wrote about it because he lost so many of the people he loved. You've never experienced that kind of loss, Millie. It changes you. He blinked hard. You know, for years after she died, friends were always trying to fix me up with other women, but it never worked. She was the only one for me. Millie had never really thought about Grandpa's feelings before. How he must have felt when Grandma got sick and died. How lonely he must have been after she was gone. How he might still be lonely now. That must have been hard, she said, losing Grandma. Grandpa nodded. It was. I still miss her every day. Well, thanks for the dinner, Millie said. I guess I'd better get started on my homework. Without being asked, Grandpa said, smiling. This is certainly a special day. In her room, Millie didn't think of death. She thought of Dylan, and she thought about what Grandpa had said about Grandma. When she recited Annabel Lee in her head this time, it seemed like a poem about love instead of a poem about death. Silly Millie, for someone who doesn't want to die, you sure spent a lot of time talking about it, the voice surrounding her said. But that's the way of things, isn't it? Talk is always easier than action. I think, Millie said, sniffling, that when I said I wanted to die, what I really wanted was to escape. I didn't want death. I just wanted my life to be different. Oh, but that really takes action, doesn't it? The voice said. Changing a life for the better, especially when the world is such a mean and rotten place. It's much easier, and ultimately much more satisfying, to just snuff life out. Which brings me to my second set of options. Much more interesting ones. These are quick and easy for you, for the most part, but they require a little more effort from me. I'm not complaining, though. There's nothing I like more than a good challenge to relieve my boredom. Say, you like Dracula, don't you? Millie could barely find her voice to answer. Why, are you going to bite my neck? Now how would I do that with you in my belly, silly girl? I know that you're a Dracula fan. The kids at school call you Dracula's daughter, don't they? Well, what you might not know is that the character of Dracula was inspired by a real person, a prince named Vlad Dracula. But he's better known by his nickname, Vlad the Impaler. Millie's insides turned to jelly. Vlad killed thousands of his enemies, but his crowning achievement was creating a forest of the impaled, where thousands of his victims, men, women, and children, were skewered through stakes driven into the ground. Now, I'm no prince, and I can't aspire to that level of achievement, but one old little impaling can't be that hard, can it? I can just take one of my metal rods and drive it through my body cavity, and it'll go straight through you and out the other side. If the spike goes through your vital organs, death comes quickly. If it doesn't, there could be some hours of bleeding and suffering. The people who walked through the forest of the impaled talked about the moaning and the gasping of the victims. So, impaling. One might say that other deaths impale in comparison. The voice's tone was cheery. It can work quickly or slowly, but the result is the same in the end. Like I said, win-win. No, Millie whispered. She wanted her mom and dad. She wanted her grandpa. They would help her if they only knew. She'd even settle for goofy Uncle Rob and Aunt Sherry as long as they would come to her rescue. She would even put on a Christmas sweater if it made them happy. Millie sat at her table in the cafeteria expectantly. But as minutes passed, she started to worry. What if Dylan didn't show up? What if she had gotten all dressed up for nothing? What if, as she'd always suspected, life offered no possibility of pleasure or happiness? But then there he was, with his leather jacket. "Hey," Millie said, trying not to sound like she was too happy to see him. "Hey," he said, setting his tray on the table and sitting across from her. I brought you something." Millie's heart pounded in excitement. She hoped she didn't show it. He reached into the pocket of his leather jacket and pulled out a worn paperback book. "H.P. Lovecraft," he said. "I was telling you all about him yesterday." "I remember," Millie said, taking the book. "The Call of Cthulhu and Other Stories. Did I say that right? Cthulhu?" "Who knows," Dylan said. "H.P. Lovecraft made it up, and he's dead, so we can't ask him. You can keep the book. I got a copy in hardcover for my birthday." He grinned. "My parents are cool. They don't mind if I like weird stuff." "Thanks." She felt a little smile creeping up on her. She slipped the book into her bag. She would certainly read the book, but it wasn't the book itself that made her feel all smiley. It was that Dylan had thought of her. While he was at home, not in her presence, he had thought of her, found the book, put it in his jacket pocket, and remembered to give it to her. In her experience, boys weren't usually this thoughtful. After dinner, in her room, Millie started reading the book. Dylan was right. It was weird. Weirder than Poe's stuff, even, and scary in a way that made it feel like spiders were crawling beneath her skin. But she loved it. After she read a couple of stories, she opened her laptop. Instead of Googling poems about death, she searched for poems about love. She found the famous one by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Once again, as with reading her other poetry, it inspired her to write herself. But not about death like normal. Not this time. And that's part 1 of Count the Ways. Do you like it? Do you think it's weird? Creepy? Not exactly creepy, I'd say. This isn't not really, but then again, these stories don't usually start as creepy anyway. If To Be Beautiful taught us anything. But yeah, what are your thoughts? Please let me know in the comments. It's really interesting, actually. And I will see you next time, I guess. Yeah, I hope to have part 2 done by, let's give it 2 days, so Wednesday. And yeah, and then we'll start on Fetch, so I'll see you soon. That's all for now. I should probably do some sort of video about 400 subscribers. Thank you for that again, by the way. That's awesome. And okay, yeah, now I'm done. I'll stop talking again. See you soon.